Good afternoon, everyone. This is Parthena. Welcome to our webinar on What's in My Food when food and shale production intersect. We're super happy that you've chosen to join us this afternoon for this very important and definitely relevant topic of discussion. Just want to introduce myself again. My name is Parthena for those of you who may not know me or this is the first time you're joining a Halt the Harm Network webinar. And I work with No Network, and I'll be moderating today's session. Just some quick housekeeping guidelines for today before we get started. Today's discussion is going to be recorded, so if you need to drop off before or you'd like to share this with other folks, we will be sending around the recording afterwards through email. Also, if you need any technical assistance, or you need any support along the way, you can chat Dawn Artiaga. She'll be helping me out today, and you can find that on the bottom right hand of your screen. There should be a dashboard if you're joining in via computer where you can chat her. You can also, if that's an issue or you're joining in by phone, you can also just email us at info@halttheharm.net with any questions and your contact info during the webinar, and Dawn will actually get in touch with you so she can help you get back on. And last but not least, we will have a survey at the end. We want to know what you thought about today's webinar, things that we can improve on, other ideas for other webinars, and so that'll come to you at the end of this webinar. So really quick about how the webinar is going to work. I'm starting off a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about Halt the Harm. We'll have our presenters speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we want to make sure that we have a good time for a robust Q&A and discussion at the end. And so in order for the Q&A to go really well, we'd love for you guys to send in any questions, comments, and whatever it is you'd like to add to the discussion in the question chat box you can see here on the right-hand side. You can also raise your hand. There should be a little hand icon, as you can see, where you can click on that and you can answer your question, or we can set up your question for the queue that we can set them up for the discussion at the end. Again, if you're having technical difficulties, make sure to chat Dawn. So now that we've got that out of the way, here are today's speakers. We're super lucky to have three amazing panelists today. We have Natasha, Léger, Ted, Auch, and Alison, Gannett. So Natasha is serving as Interim Executive Director of Citizens for a Healthy Community. Before stepping in as Interim Executive Director, Natasha served on the CHC board. She brings to CHC legal, location, ecosystem, and industry analysis experience. She's also an international trade attorney turned independent business consultant turned editor of a location intelligence magazine turned author of Travel Healthy, a Road Warrior's Guide to Healthy Eating, or Eating Healthy, excuse me. Ted Auch, our second speaker, he is with FracTracker Alliance. Ted's primary responsibilities at FracTracker include mapping and bringing to light data gaps associated with the wastewater and land use footprint of the unconventional oil and gas build-out across the Midwest Great Lakes region of North America. His work also focuses on the food, energy, and water nexus as it relates to hydraulic fracturing and related oil and gas activities and infrastructure, with a focus on waste, watershed resilience, and freshwater demand and land use change. And last but not least, we have Alison Gannett from Holy Terror Farm. Alison is a self-sufficient farmer from the North Fork Valley, a world champion extreme free skier, pro mountain biker, award-winning global cooling consultant, and founder of multiple nonprofits, including Save Our Snow. She has spent half a lifetime working to make the world a better place, designing and building the first straw home in a national historic district, creating the world's first solar SUV, fighting fracking for natural gas, and creating local food infrastructures. Over the past 15 years, she has reduced her own personal carbon footprint energy use by more than half with her professional training as an energy consultant, including a quest to grow and raise food on her own. So a little bit about Halt the Harm before we get started. What is Halt the Harm for those of you who may not know or it's your first time joining us? Halt the Harm is a national advocacy network really designed to connect, serve, and support the dedicated individuals and leaders, such as yourself, and our panelists today working to halt the harms caused by fracking in the United States. And the network's goal is really to expand and strengthen the base of leaders and supporters of the movement and facilitate collaboration by developing services to equip leaders with the tools and strategies they really need to halt the harms of fracking in their local communities and ultimately to win the fight nationally. So since its start almost about 4 years ago, the network has grown to more than 500 leaders and 12,000 supporters across all 50 states. So now, who are the leaders of Halt the Harm, or who's in the network? Leaders in the network are really just individuals actively working, collaborating to help those living in communities negatively impacted by fracking. A leader could really be anyone. It could be someone who is working on this professionally as a 9-to-5 career, but also could be someone who's a volunteer, a stay-at-home parent who is compelled to join the movement because, for example, perhaps their kids live near a fracking site or their kids go to school near a fracking site. And leaders are able to access free resources and services online. We have some of them listed out here, like our leader directory where you can email others directly or follow them on social media, campaign strategy and support, webinars like this one, and event support, just to name a few. So here I just grabbed a screenshot of some of the webinars that we have posted on our site. We have a really diverse webinar library where we've collected all the webinars we've done in the past few years, and you can access that. So those are just some of the things we're working on this year, but we're always looking for ideas and suggestions from individuals within the network. And some of you listening today may already be a leader, but if you are not yet one, you are in luck. Just look out for an email from me within the next week or so giving you access to these great services and resources online. And as always, I'm always happy to talk to you personally with any questions you might have, ideas that you've been working on. So with that, I'll hand it over to Natasha, Ted, and Alison to get the presentation portion started. And I believe Natasha will be the one starting.
Thanks so much, Prathana. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Prathana and Halt the Harm team for hosting this webinar. We really appreciate it and are very excited about presenting our food shale production map. So let's make sure this is working. I'm having a technical, oh, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. So by way of background, CHC is a Citizens for a Healthy Community, is a 500 plus member grassroots organization dedicated to protecting Delta County's air, water, and food sheds from the impacts of oil and gas development. Delta County is located in southwest Colorado. And in particular, we are dedicated to preventing the North Fork Valley within Delta County, which is home to the largest concentration of organic farms in the state of Colorado, from becoming an industrialized oil and gas zone. The majority of the lands which permeate and surround us are public lands, so that includes Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service. So the majority of our focus is on oil and gas proposals on public lands and how that impacts surrounding farms. Given our vantage point, we don't think you can talk about energy independence without talking about food independence and food safety. In other words, you can't meaningfully talk about oil and gas development without looking at the overlap with food infrastructure. So we teamed up with FracTracker Alliance to look at this more closely and better understand the potential risks to our food supply of unfettered oil and gas development, when the majority of that development occurs on rural lands and therefore agricultural lands. So impacted communities know the impact of fracking on their water quality, plant life, and health, including the health of their livestock and animals. But who else knows that? How many people, when they cozy up to a natural gas fireplace, for example, on a chilly winter evening with their organic snacks from Whole Foods, think about the connection between the two? Or what about when they turn on their kitchen lights, food processor, open up a refrigerator to enjoy a summer salad, fruits and vegetables, eggs, dairy, pasteurized chicken, or meat from the farmer's market, or even plug in their electric vehicle for recharge? How many are making the connection between home heating, electricity, and what they eat? In 2016, natural gas displaced coal as the primary fuel for generation for the first time in history, as coal-fired plants were either taken offline due to the inability to operate profitably or were converted to natural gas. So how do you even start thinking about these connections? Well, FracTracker asked this question 2 years ago. They asked how many organic farms are located within a half-mile of oil and gas operations. The answer they found was 11%. And that is probably an underestimated number, because that just refers to certified organic farms and doesn't include those farms that are practicing organic but do not have their certification. However, less than 1% of U.S. agricultural land is dedicated to organic agriculture, which led to the next question. What about the other 99% of U.S. agricultural land and commodity and conventional agriculture, which is the backbone of our food supply and food security? So why do we care about fracking on or near farms? Well, because these are industrial operations with industrial consequences and air pollution because these are industrial operations and industrial consequences, from air pollution to water and soil contamination. In addition, there are climate and ozone impacts from these operations which impact vegetative growth. So farmers and ranchers worry about water quality and quantity, weather, yield, and cost and profitability. So one farmer's livelihood is another person's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So how do we know if our food is safe? When more and more studies are coming out on the connection between oil and gas chemicals and the impact on human and animal health. Oil and gas chemicals have been associated with cancer, cardiovascular disease, immune and endocrine system disruption, reproductive growth disorders, and respiratory disease. Studies have also connected oil and gas chemicals to reproductive disorders, respiratory disease, and stunted growth within livestock. We also know that spills occur regularly. In Colorado, for example, on average, there are 1.4 spills a day, 12% of which result in water contamination. Also, oil and gas companies are exempt from a number of certain reporting requirements in several environmental laws, from certain environmental laws and regulations. In addition, rural gas gathering lines are exempt from federal pipeline safety regulations, which means that if there's any incremental failure along those pipelines, there's no way of the public really knowing that. Studies have found chemicals in fracking fluid to be persistent, toxic, and fast-traveling, and fracking fluid chemicals to commingle and be absorbed by soils and potentially by plants. So we trust our farmers to the extent that they trust their water and soils. But how do we know? Water, crops, and livestock, to my knowledge right now, are not currently being tested for oil and gas chemicals. So that caused us to think about, well, what is the overlap between oil and gas infrastructure and food infrastructure? We developed a map to raise awareness of the intersection between food infrastructure and oil and gas infrastructure. While studies are being conducted on the impact of oil and gas on the food supply, a geospatial analysis to get a sense of the potential risk at the local, state, and national level has never been done before. So let's get into some screenshots from the map that we developed with FracTracker, and Ted will get into some more details around it. We will also have the links to access the map. So here what you're looking at are the shale basins across the United States. The red lines indicate shale basins. The brown lines indicate shale plays, so where there is active oil and gas activity. These green dots indicate the number of farms aggregated at the county level. And so when we overlaid this, we were quite shocked to discover that 93% of farms are within shale basins. Now, to be clear, just because you're in a shale basin does not mean that there's oil and gas activity around you. However, there are two issues here. The issue is those farms that are currently within active oil and gas activity or active shale plays, and then those farms that are potentially at risk if those shale basins were to be potentially developed. So we also looked at, so in this map we've got the blue shaded areas which represent the average agricultural market production value per county. And what this showed is that 50% of U.S. agricultural production comes from farms located in active shale plays. That was a startling number to us as well. And so what you can see here, and hopefully you can see my pointer, is we've got Southern California, we've got Texas, we've got Northern Colorado, Michigan, and then the Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania range that represent the majority of food production from the United States that are within these active plays. And if you drill in, so in the map you'll be able to drill into the county level, and this shows Southern California, the Monterey Temblor region. And in this region right here you have well over 5,000 farms. So back to this issue of those farms that are currently in areas with active production, if you contrast that to Delta County where we are located, right there, we're in the Piceance Basin. There isn't a lot of oil and gas activity around us right now. There's a fair amount of activity in the surrounding counties, but in Delta County itself, we do not have a lot of active oil and gas. However, the Bureau of Land Management seeks to open 95% of the public lands and minerals surrounding us to oil and gas leasing. So the question for us really is, how do we ensure that our food supply, as I mentioned earlier, we're the largest concentration of oil and gas, largest concentration of organic farms in the state of Colorado. How do we ensure that those farms remain safe?
Hey, Natasha.
And so,
sorry,
yes.
I just wanted to interject. We had a question from the audience that I think wouldn't be as relevant if we waited until the end, if you don't mind me asking. The question is from Catherine Thomason. And the question, I think, was a clarification question. It was, the 93% of farms within shale basins doesn't look correct. Is this the production amount or the number of farms?
It's the number of farms. So to be clear, there are 589,922 farms within shale plays, and there are 1,369,961 farms within shale basins.
Great, thank you for that.
So we also added a public lands layer to the map, and what you see here on the screen is Delta County, and so what the brown layers show National Forest or U.S. Forest Service, and then the grayish greenish is Bureau of Land Management. So significant portion of the lands that surround and permeate Delta County are public lands. So another concern that we have are if oil and gas leasing is opened up or public lands are opened up to oil and gas leasing, what impact does that have on the downstream farms, especially when headwaters and watersheds originate on those public lands? So when we think about energy independence versus food safety in Colorado as an example, and this is just an example, I mean, what the map enables communities to do is to really look at this from their perspective. And so when I looked at natural gas production in Colorado, we can see that there are 54,000 wells, an estimated 270,000 equipment facilities, over 4,500 miles of gas gathering pipelines, which is worth $9.7 billion in economic impact. Well, if you compare that to the food infrastructure, there are 36,180 farms in Colorado. 21,512 of them are surrounded by public lands that are within shale basins. And then the total economic value of that is $7.8 billion. And so our major question with looking at this map and this intersection is to say, okay, well, if we're talking about energy independence, we absolutely have to start looking at food independence as well, because if those food sheds become contaminated, where are we supposed to get our food from? The energy independence argument from oil and gas production, I should be very specific about that, energy independence from oil and gas production. The argument behind that is that we shouldn't be dependent upon foreign countries for that. Well, by looking at this map and realizing that our food infrastructure is potentially at risk, the same argument holds, which is that we should not be dependent upon foreign countries for our food if one, the food becomes contaminated, and two, if there are risks to even the production level of our food. So you start to compare this even deeper. The top 10 counties, natural gas production counties in Colorado, are also the top 4 of the top 10 counties in Colorado, gas-producing counties in Colorado, are also 4 of the leading agricultural counties. Delta County, with 1,250 farms, is the 5th largest agricultural producing county in the state. But as I mentioned before, is still relatively immune from oil and gas activity. So this is the first time that the intersection of food infrastructure and oil and gas infrastructure has been closely examined. And we're hoping that this will be an opportunity to really start a frack-free food movement in thinking about, well, what are all the risks? Ted is going to spend some more time talking about how we developed the map, what was behind it, and some more details, and then Alison is going to talk about how this impacts her from a farmer and impacted citizen perspective, and then I'll circle back at the end. So let me turn it back over to Ted.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Just wanted to really interject quickly. We've got some really great questions coming in. Thanks so much, and keep them coming. We're collecting them, and we might ask a few during presentations. If not, they'll definitely be asked at the end.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ted Auch. As Parthena mentioned, I work with FracTracker primarily in Ohio and West Virginia. For those of you that don't know FracTracker, we're a nonprofit that studies, maps, and communicates the risks of oil and gas development across the United States. I specifically focus on the unconventional oil and gas industry's footprint with respect to water, waste, and land use. I think that's those are the three kind of pillars of what I'm interested in, and a lot of that's come from asking questions in some of the states I've looked at when I go into some of these communities. So I first wanted to talk about why I personally thought this map was important, and the reason is simply it's just a function of connectivity, right? I mean, food, energy, water, all these things are connected, and the more I travel around Southeast Ohio, across Wisconsin, Minnesota to look at sand mining, et cetera, the more I'm seeing the connectivity between how we get our food and how we get energy out of the ground, whether it's a compressor station in the middle of a beef operation up in the top of the slide, top left side of the slide, or it's a well pad or a gathering line in Belmont County in Southeast Ohio, or the Rover pipeline. You can see that pipeline to the right of this slide in the middle. This Rover pipeline, this is a photo I took. It's going straight through Amish country, where there's a lot of really good Amish farmers doing really good work, really good land stewardship work. But a lot of that work is being undercut in the name of energy exploration, processing, and transport, and that kind of thing. So I'm just really concerned about connectivity and the impact that the energy industry is going to have on our watersheds, on our soils, on really progressive agricultural practices, as I mentioned, and also how we define fracking. I mean, if we really limit ourselves when we talk about fracking to the well pad, we're really undercutting or kind of glossing over quite a bit of large-scale industrial infrastructure being kind of foisted on these communities in the name of, energy independence. You have injection wells. You see this cute little calf here on the left here. That's in the background. There's a Class 2 injection well just north of Columbus that disposes of oil and gas waste. That injection well is in the watershed that serves the Columbus area. Their fresh water. On the bottom left here, you see this is a Gulfport Energy freshwater withdrawal installation. This unit can take in about 2.5 to 3 million gallons per day. This is in a reservoir in Southeast Ohio. In the bottom left, you see a graph that, needless to say, it's kind of a complicated graph, but what it tells you is we've done a lot of work in several watersheds in Ohio looking at the impact of the oil and gas industry on the watersheds. And this is a graph that shows the water demand for fracking present and future relative to other industries. But the take-home of this graph and of our watershed modeling relative to hydraulic fracturing is that in select watersheds where we've looked, the oil and gas industry is getting more and more gluttonous with regard to their demand for water, while other industries in some of these watersheds are getting more and more efficient with regard to productivity. So that's really concerning to me. The other thing that's really concerning to me, and this is the heart of it all, is the fact that for every unit of energy that the hydraulic fracturing industry is getting out of the ground, every unit of energy they get out of the ground is requiring more and more resources, more and more water, producing more and more waste, liquid and solid, and requiring more and more land, whether it's a freshwater impoundment, as you see on the top left, or Class 2 injection wells to dispose of waste, as you see in the top right of this slide. the Beaver County, Pennsylvania cracker facility in the middle left of this slide, et cetera, et cetera. The point is this industry is getting more and more, less and less efficient with regard to how they get energy out of the ground, and I think that's going to bring to mind, there's going to be serious conflicts that are going to start to percolate in otherwise friendly areas for oil and gas development, centered around water, waste, and land use. The big deal here is that every single trend with regard to this industry, with regard to their water, waste, and land use, is going from the bottom left to the top right of these graphs. And the reason this is concerning, in this data right here, you see these are, this is a group of about 55,000 wells we got data for with regard to a study we were doing with a group called Ceres out of Boston. And what we did was we compiled a bunch of data on water demand per well over several shale plays, and then we aggregated it, and then we averaged it over quarters back to like 2009, 2010. And everywhere you look in the United States, water demand from the fracking industry is going up by about 7 to 12%, upwards of 22% per well per year. So this is going to create more and more stresses in certain watersheds around the United States, with less and less energy coming out of the ground for every unit of water used. And that's really concerning to me. And I think it should be concerning to the agricultural sector. So that water demand feeds directly back into waste produced. This graph right here is a really simple graph which shows average water demand for Ohio hydraulic fracturing laterals on the X, and on the Y, it's average brine produced per well in those counties. We did this for about 18 counties. The take home of this simple linear graph is that there's a high correlation between water demand and liquid brine produced. So as this trend goes up with regard to water demand, the similar trend will be occurring with regard to brine produced, which will create more and more pressure on our injection wells, specifically here in Ohio, Oklahoma, Kansas, and other states. And we already know what that's done with regard to earthquake activity. But I think it's going to be even more profound with regard to water quality and related issues. So, okay, so now we know that there's a lot of water being produced. That's directly related to brine produced. And now this is a graph of average Class 2 injection well volume disposal rates in Ohio. And there's average, there's cumulative, and there's quarterly. But needless to say, these are just three figures that give you a sense for where the trend is going. Again, this just speaks to the inefficiency with which the hydraulic fracturing industry is operating. They already had set what I think is a really low bar with regard to efficiency, and that bar is getting even lower and lower with every quarter. I travel around Ohio quite a bit, around the Great Lakes quite a bit, and I always think it's nice to see what it is we're talking about. For those of you that haven't seen or know what Class 2 injection wells are, I just want to give you a couple images of what they look like. These are some facilities throughout Ohio. The top left one, the Wiles well, that's east of Columbus. So is the one on the top right, the Danville Feed well. Excuse me. On the top, on the bottom right, you see a well in Stark County, Ohio, which for those of you that don't know is Canton, Ohio, is just north of where this well is located. Trumbull County on the bottom left. So these are the kinds of wells that we're talking about that are being more and more demand is being put on them. Oftentimes they're really old wells. The robustness of those wells is dubious at best. And these are the types of things in the middle of agricultural areas that we know so little about. I mean, it's the classic known unknown, as Donald Rumsfeld once said. So this is what we're talking about with regard to waste. This speaks nothing of the solid waste coming out of the fracking operations. And we know that laterals are getting longer. Again, this is from data we've done in Ohio, which means that you're going to get more solid waste, more liquid waste. That's going to put a lot of pressure on these kinds of facilities, as well as landfills. And what that does to the surrounding water quality, soil quality is a real concern. So those are the kinds of issues that I'm concerned with regard to water and waste. But the land use thing is to me, the thing that really strikes a chord. we did some work several years back where we flew over a 3-county area in southeast Ohio that ran the gradient of low to high oil and gas activity. You can see the flyover area in the bottom left map. You can see a magnified component portion of that map on the right-hand side, which is Carroll County, Ohio. We did this work with a group called Lighthawk, which is a really great nonprofit we work with a lot. So we flew over this area, took high-resolution imagery, and then quantified the impact of the oil and gas industry in that area. And what we found, which I thought was the most interesting part of the study, was that for every 1 acre of well pad you have in this area, you have 10 acres to 15 acres of gathering line. So these are obviously, those are the lines that connect well pads to the downstream infrastructure. So you know, this is just a poorly understood component of the oil and gas industry, but it also speaks to the idea that if you restrict your definition of fracking to the well pad, you're undercutting, you're really not getting a sense for the scale and scope of this. So with this study, the big take-home message from this was that we applied this data to what Ohio Department of Natural Resources is saying will happen in the next, 15, 20 years with regard to the number of Utica well permits. And if you assume that that trend runs its course, that means that this data tells us that 20 to 30% of these core regions of these states, whether it's Ohio, Colorado, Pennsylvania, the kind of core counties where most of the activity is happening, 20 to 30% of those landscapes in those counties will have been altered forever in the name of short-term energy independence. A lot of that is agriculture. But if you expand your analysis to assume that, this is a moving target and there's a lot of other counties around the counties that we all know are experiencing oil and gas activity, you're still talking about a 10 to 15% of the landscape alteration. This is a non-trivial amount of land that's going to be altered in the name of pipeline right-of-ways, compressor stations, injection wells, you name it. So anyway, the data says that land use should be a topic talked about, and it was not talked about here in Ohio at the outset of this conversation. In fact, it was almost ignored.
Hey Ted, I just want to interject, and we got a request for clarification on one of the charts that you had.
Sure.
This is from Barb Arindel. What is the difference between total and cumulative numbers on your graph? I think it's before the class 2 injection well pictures.
Yeah, so cumulative question, Barb, the answer to that is cumulative volumes is on the secondary y-axis to the right, and average volumes are on the left. So it's basically the total volume disposed of in the state of Ohio is on the right-hand side, and the average is on the left. And I think I changed up the units there.
Great, thank you.
Getting back to the land use thing, I think that the water, waste, land use kind of intersection all crystallizes in this case study that I think is really important and needs to be highlighted, definitely in Ohio and at the national level, and that is the Muskingum River watershed, where Leah Harper and some others here in Ohio have done some great work. I've come along and done some analysis here to try to understand how the oil and gas industry has affected this watershed. It's in southeast Ohio. You can see here a map with Columbus and just to the west of the watershed, Akron at the top of the watershed. This thing all feeds down in the Ohio River. The reason this is important is because it's the watershed where 53% of Utica wells are right now, and it's also the source of 53% of freshwater withdrawals for the fracking industry right now. It's also 62% of all fresh water in the state of Ohio used in the fracking process has been used within the watershed. So that spread between the 53% withdrawal and 62% usage speaks to the fact that we have a very poor understanding of where all the water is coming from. The documented water withdrawals are from the Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District. But if you take all the volumes of water that they've compiled and that we've mapped, and then you put it against the amount of water used from the fracking industry, there's a big spread between how much water the fracking industry has used and how much they've withdrawn. What does that mean? It means that somewhere they're getting water from someplace, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it's coming from first and second order streams and other places. So there's a huge gap between what we know and what we don't know as it relates to this industry's effect on this watershed specifically. So I think that this watershed is a working case study. It's an ongoing case study that many people are looking at, because this watershed is an already compromised watershed, and I'm not sure that it can withstand the types of trends in water demand that I've described in previous slides going forward. And it's also you know, it's not the most agriculturally productive basin in the country, but indeed it does produce quite a bit of agriculture, and it's under a tremendous amount of stress. So that's giving you a sense for why I thought this map was important. Now I just wanted to briefly describe how we made the map. It was a pretty simple process. We used ArcGIS. For those of you that aren't familiar, it's just a kind of the bells and whistles mapping software that most folks are using these days. We used a data set that had 4,600 counties across the United States, the lower 48. We excluded Alaska from this analysis because we didn't have enough ag census data, and that all those blank cells in that data created for a little bit of an unworkable process. So we excluded Alaska from this work. We pulled in 212 metrics, agricultural census metrics from the 2012 census. We joined that data with the ag census by FIPS code. And what we did was, instead of using all 212 ag metrics, we pared that down to 181. So this is a really large data set. And then we created this map. So these are really large data sets. Natasha kind of spoke to what it is, you know, the kind of primary take-homes with regard to number of farms, agricultural productivity. But needless to say, the map that we've created includes some of those highlight, you know, headline numbers like what Natasha mentioned, but it also includes some of the inside baseball stuff like, you know, amount of pesticides, herbicides, percent organic farms, percent of equipment. I mean, it's just a kind of catch-all data set that we compiled. And then what we did was we pulled out those counties that are in the shale basins and shale plays, and then we analyzed them separately to try to ask, you know, some of the simple questions that Natasha mentioned. I think this is a very 30,000-foot, you know, coarse approximation of what's really going on out there, because again, it's only at the county level. But I do think that this is these are conservative numbers, because we strictly defined oil and gas activity as shale basins and plays. And the reason that I say that that's a strict definition is because we know from a lot of the work we've done and others that if you really want to talk about the entirety of the footprint of oil and gas development, you have to talk about compressor stations, pipelines, oil refineries, et cetera, all the midstream, downstream infrastructure. And more to the point of what I'm concerned about, and the next steps that I intend to pursue, is this whole sand mining component of it, which for those of you that aren't familiar, there's quite a bit of sand involved in the fracking process, upwards of 4,000 to 5,000 tons per well. That demand, as you can see from this little chart I included here for Ohio and West Virginia, demand for sand per well in Ohio and West Virginia is going up by about 15 to 20% per year. So again, laterals getting longer, water demand getting higher, waste production getting higher, sand demand getting higher. Why? Because this stuff is pretty cheap. And if you look at the portfolio of costs on a well pad basis, water is pretty cheap. So there's no price signal to get the fracking guys and gals to use less water. But more to the point on this thing with the sand mining, and what concerns me here is we've never seen a boom like this. The USGS data says that 65% of all revenue in the sand mining industry has occurred since the late 90s, over 30% of all production since the late 90s. So there's a real boom in the silica sand mining space. And that means you're going to get more mom and pops that are going to want to get involved in this, which is going to drive down the price a little bit. But what's going to also happen is during lulls in oil and gas with regard to the price of oil and gas, the fracking folks are going to do one of two things. They're going to rely on lower quality sands in some of these other areas, not including the red dots where I have right here. These are the active sand mines. But outside of that region, they're going to use lower quality sand, or they're going to buy up mines themselves so that they control production of sand. And that's really concerning to me, because all these mines, all these really good silica geologies, namely the St. Peter sandstone, which is what I've looked at a lot, all of these geologies occur beneath some of the most productive soils in the United States. 53% or 53 to 55% of the St. Peter sandstone, the highest quality silica sand used by the industry today, occurs within the breadbasket soils, the grassland prairie soils of the United States, the most productive soils. And as a highlight for that, I'd just like you to notice in the top center part of Illinois is LaSalle County, Illinois. And that's a really good case study for this because LaSalle County, Illinois, in case you don't know, depending on the year, is the #1 or #2 highest producing per acre soybean and corn county in the country. It's also the home of Unimin and US Silica, two of the biggest players in the silica mining industry. It's also home to really big mines that are really close to rail. So that means that in that area, even when the price of oil and gas is low, if you have a mine that's close to rail, you can still make it profitable. And the reason that LaSalle County is interesting is because, as I mentioned, it's very agriculturally productive. You also have pretty, folks that live there that are, you wouldn't classify them as, you know, left of center or anything like that. They're just very concerned about how this will affect agricultural productivity going forward. And they're asking really hard questions of these companies, and the companies are kind of, you know, just shaking their head and dismissing them. But I think that LaSalle County offers a case study for where you can create partnerships between otherwise disparate parties as it relates to energy production and that kind of thing. And I also think that this sand mining work that hopefully we're going to be doing next speaks to how you can't strictly define fracking by the well pad space. It's all this other infrastructure that this industry requires in order to go forward. And their demand for all of that stuff, the size of well pads, the amount of compressor stations, this, that, the other thing, is expanding every quarter. So they're becoming more inefficient, and I think that there's a chance for folks like FracTracker, Natasha, and others to kind of work together to appeal to farmers, to the farm bureaus, that kind of thing, to say, look, whether you agree with or don't agree with fracking, that's not the point. The point here is that this is an industry that's not efficient and growing less so every day. Based on your needs with regard to soil and water, we think that you need to start asking some questions, and we'd be happy to, you know, I personally would be happy to help those people, but that's kind of the take home. Those are the next steps for me, and with that, I'll hand it over to Alison.
Hi, so this is Alison Gannett. I'm talking to you from Paonia, Colorado, which is in Delta County, where Natasha was just talking about. And this is a picture of my brain a few years ago. I was diagnosed with terminal malignant brain cancer, and basically the long story short is the straw. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'll keep going. Sorry, I thought I heard something strange there. So anyway, I looked into what could have possibly given me my brain cancer with my doctors, and one of the straws that broke the camel's back was that I was living in Crested Butte, Colorado, where there was a lot of radioactive water and also heavy metal contaminated water from unregulated mining in the 1800s. So I wanted to move to a place that did not have contaminated water, so searched all over the country, even Canada, New Zealand, different parts abroad, and decided on Paonia, Colorado, and this is my home that you're looking at. Not my red barn, but this is the town of Paonia. I moved here in 2010, and we bought an 80-acre farm to grow and raise all our own food. And basically I wanted to control my water, my food, and my air. And basically if I could grow and raise all my own food with my pharmacy, my F-A-R-M-A-C-Y, that I could reverse the causes of my cancer. And I have. Over the last 4 years, stopped the cancering process. I'm not only alive, but I am thriving and feeling better than I ever had. And it is very scary to me. This Natasha mentioned that almost 95% of our county is proposed to be drilled upon in the future by the Bureau of Land Management. And my farm, our farm, is surrounded on all sides by this BLM land. So if this proposal goes through, basically our entire way of life could be jeopardized, because if you don't have clean air, clean water, and clean soil, for someone like me who is dealing with such a potentially fatal illness, even just one little spill or a little bit of contamination is going to be very deadly. And interestingly enough, we are actually neighbors with a coal mine next door to us, and at first that really freaked us out, but we actually are able to log on to a website where the USGS does third-party testing of our water that is affected by that coal mine. And so we know that they have to abide by the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Drinking Water Act, whatever it's called. But we did not know that all these proposed drilling pads for oil and gas would basically be exempt from those regulations that our coal mine is beholden to. As a climate change consultant, I never thought I would be in love with coal, but I am suddenly now thinking, well, if I had to choose between the two, it certainly would be coal right now and not oil and gas. As farmers, I think the biggest struggle for us is that it's very hard to make money farming. We raise cattle, pigs, we grow and raise all our own vegetables, we sell everything at markets, we have nuts and berries and fruits. Basically, besides coffee, chocolate, and salt, we grow and raise all our own food. And then anything we have extra, we sell online or on Facebook. And that's the way we make a living. It's very difficult to make a living farming, which I think is why a lot of farms are being asked to put oil and gas extraction facilities on our land, because it is perceived as quick money. But in my mind, I look at our neighboring farms in the county next to us, to the north. They're about 80 miles away from us in Rifle and Silt, Colorado, and some of our farmer friends have basically had a spill from like a tanker truck or a pipeline, a gathering line, or an actual brine overflow, and it's contaminated their water at their farm, and they've gotten sick, their animals have gotten sick, and the sad part is they can't stay at their farm because they're getting sick and their animals are sick and their crops are all terrible. But they also can't sell because their farm is contaminated. For my husband and I, we have every single penny that we've ever owned in our farm, and if anything should go wrong here, we have no 401k, we have no stocks or bonds, we have no backup plan. So that is the real tough part to swallow. Another thing that is really hard for us is when we do sell those crops, we are very concerned that it's possible that there is a spill upstream from us right now, and we would never be notified about it. Our animals could drink that contaminated water. Our crops, such as spinach or lettuces or fruit trees, everything could be sprayed with that contaminated water. We would never be notified, nor would we be required to be notified of some type of contamination. My biggest concern is that I could then harvest those contaminated crops, and then I would put them on the food delivery truck that could possibly go to a school or a hospital. We sell locally. A lot of farms sell all over Colorado, and a lot of our organic farms in our area sell nationally. So what is a liability for us if we are suddenly sending out what we believe is beyond organic food, never had even gotten near a chemical or a pesticide, and suddenly it's covered with carcinogenic chemicals from fracking or endocrine disruptors, a numerous amount of chemicals. What we have chosen to do at our farm, since the fracking wells north of us and east of us have not, they don't have to test the water, is that we have spent tens of thousands of dollars to test our water twice a year to make sure it is not contaminated. I also believe if we do get contaminated, and the likelihood is high if drilling should come into our area closer, is that the only way I will have a case is to have the legal proof that my farm did not contain fracking chemicals before they drilled on the nearby lands around us. So these maps can provide an incredible amount of information for myself to use and fellow farmers to use, and for all of you listening. We need to talk to our friends, educate people about what is at stake. We need to talk to our politicians, show them these maps, and say, hey, you know, where you want to drill is our food, and our food needs clean air, clean water, clean soil, and that is changing rapidly. In these areas that have been drilled on, they don't have clean air, clean water, and clean soil. And we need to be active in saving our own food supply. Water is life. For us on our farm, we have a very small farm, only 80 acres. We use an incredible amount of water, even though we're very, very careful with how we use that water and have all these water-saving strategies in place, which, as Ted mentioned, the energy industry does not have in place. But on big drought years like 2002 and 2012, our water is not reliable here. We do not have enough water for the existing farms. The BLM office, our local BLM office, estimates that we are 30% over allocated for our water for farm use alone in our valley. And so now the energy companies are coming in and buying up that farm water, and it is frightening to us. So I'm going to end right there, and we'll go on to a follow-up, and feel free to ask some questions online.
Great. Thank you so much, Alison, and Ted and Natasha for a super comprehensive knowledge on this subject matter. And we've got a bunch of questions in the queue already, so we'll go ahead and get started. The first question here we have is from Christine Hughes. The question being, has there been a comparison between economic impact of ag versus shale in these areas, number of local jobs for local people in these regions, or other economic impact evaluations based on these maps? What orgs will be working on this kind of analysis and education going forward? And I open up this question for everyone.
Let me take a stab at one component of that, and that is in Ohio and the jobs. The study that was done was kind of beforehand by the state and Energy in Depth and some other Ohio Oil and Gas Association with regard to their projections for tax revenue and job creation. Unfortunately, when they make those projections, 5 or 6 years ago, they don't get held to them, and then what they didn't point out is what the wiggle room around those numbers were. And when they talk about job creation, what we've had in Ohio has been a job import. It hasn't been organic job growth. It's been job imports from other states. The people in Ohio, with regard to the job creation, the folks in Ohio are not getting, and I can't speak to other states, but just where I work, are not getting the high value, well pad jobs, that kind of thing. What they're getting are the service sector, the new Super 8s or the Outback Steakhouses and this, that, the other thing. And oftentimes the oil and gas industry and says, for various reasons, one being that they say, Ohioans can't pass the drug test. That's been a canard that's been out there several times. But with regard to jobs, we haven't seen the job growth in Ohio. We see job imports. I mean, if you ask anyone that lives in these communities, they can't tell you how many, I've seen it too, how many Oklahoma, Texas license plates you see on big white trucks. So I think that's one thing. As far as comparing ag cost benefits versus oil and gas cost benefits in these counties, I haven't seen any work on that, but I mean, I haven't looked extensively. But I think there are a lot of next steps that need to come from the work that we've done. So we'd like to leverage some of this mapping that we've done to help folks do that kind of work.
Great. Natasha or Alison, do any of you wanted to answer that question, or we can move on to the next one?
I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay, perfect. So next we have a question from Eleanor Bravo. The question is, are you aware of crop contamination due to the spraying of herbicides along pipeline routes?
That I don't know that. I don't know if Ted, you have any information on that. I have not seen that.
I'm not aware of that, but I do know in some states you are allowed to spread brine on fields if the pH of the soils falls below a threshold. I know that all comes out of Kansas's corporate commission, the state of Kansas's corporate commission. They have some laws in place that allow you to spread brine as a soil amendment if the soil pH is too low. But regard to adjacent to pipelines, no, I haven't seen anything like that.
Great. So the next question we have is from Siobhan Benitez. The question is, as an ordinary consumer, how can I choose food or food products which encourage responsible energy harvesting?
Well, I think your first question, I think that's a great question, and I think if you can shop locally at your farmer's market and ask your farmer point blank, do you use any pesticides or herbicides? Do you heat your greenhouses or hoop houses with natural gas? The personal responsibility of, I have chosen to disconnect all the natural gas here at my farm because I don't want to support that industry. So if one of my customers asked me what I was doing to not use natural gas, and also I grow all my vegetables and fruit and meats without any pesticides or herbicides or any chemicals, and a lot of those chemicals are made out of natural gas. It's amazing how many, or plastic, a lot of the components of plastic are made out of natural gas, so we don't use any plastic here at the farm. So there's a lot of things that farmers can do to avoid natural gas in their own use, and I think buying locally is probably one of the biggest things you can do, because those fruits and vegetables and meats haven't traveled, an average, they say, to the grocery store is 1,400 miles for the average head of broccoli to arrive at your store. So reducing your carbon footprint by just buying locally from chemical-free farms is one of the biggest things you can do.
Great.
I would like to add to that, because I think in that question is really the issue of risk in terms of how do you know what's in the food and what it is that you're buying. So yes, absolutely buying local, but if you're buying from grocery stores, is really demanding from those grocery stores an inventory of where the food is coming from. And, are they in active industrial zones, including oil and gas, so that you can actually be more knowledgeable. And that's really part of the objective behind this map as well, is to help consumers really ask the question, is that if you know that your food is being sourced from a certain area, is that you can find out how else it's being impacted.
Great, thank you for that. And we'll just take one more last question, because we don't want to go too over time, and I know folks have need to go off and do other things. The last question we'll take is from from Christine Hughes, and the question is for Alison. Does Alison share her concerns with her customers, or are you hesitant to raise the issue with them as it might make them question the safety of your food?
That's a great question. I think we saw a lot of damage occur when the public lands announcement about drilling in our area was proposed in, when was that, 2010, 2011. A lot of our customers heard about the proposal. We weren't even getting drilled upon. It was just leasing those lands, and a lot of our customers contacted us and said, you know, is your food okay? It hadn't even happened yet. It still hasn't even happened yet. But we are already seeing the damage as farmers of the proposals, the potential of drilling oil and gas around us. So I think people don't realize, the BLM doesn't realize how damaging that can be for people to just even think that your farm could possibly be contaminated. And, you know, we've had to spend a lot of money to prove to our customers that our water is clean and that our air is clean and our soil is clean. And in other extractive industries, the farmer doesn't have to pay for that. Say the coal industry. The coal industry pays to show us, the farmer, that our area is meets the regulations for the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the bummer is right now is that us farmers who already don't make any money have to prove to our customers that our food is amazing, which it is.
Great, thank you, Alison. So we're going to close out. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left today. We had several other questions, and I do want to acknowledge folks who asked questions. Thank you so much. We're going to make sure to share those with our speakers in the next couple of days and try to get you answers individually as possible. So thank you again so much for everyone who joined via phone or your internet. And to our leaders, Ted, Natasha, and Alison, for sharing with us the work that they're doing and engaging in the Q&A. If you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask or comments, there is a survey coming your way once you exit out of this webinar. If you have suggestions for another webinar, we do these pretty often, and we're slowly filling up our webinar calendar for the next couple of months. So go ahead and send them to me. I'm at the other end of the info at halttheharm.net email address. So thanks again to everyone for joining. Check out Citizens for a Healthy Community, FracTracker, Alison, Gannett, and Halt the Harm out on our websites. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar. Have a great day.